Section 66 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Bakuma of the White Skin, Chapter 6. Having gone some distance by these pleasant ways, he saw a shapely house dozing in the sunlight. It was thatched with the wings of birds, blue wings and yellow and white wings, and in the center of the house there was a door of crystal set in posts of bronze. The queen of this island lived there, Rigru, large-eyed, the daughter of Lodin and wife of Dara de Gamra. She was seated on a crystal throne with her son Segda by her side, and they welcomed the High King courteously. There were no servants in this palace, nor was there need for them. The High King found that his hands had washed themselves, and when later on he noticed that food had been placed before him, he noticed also that it had come without the assistance of servile hands. A cloak was laid gently about his shoulders, and he was glad of it, for his own was soiled by exposure to sun and wind and water, and was not worthy of a lady's eye. Then he was invited to eat. He noticed, however, that food had been set for no one but himself, and this did not please him, for to eat alone was contrary to the hospitable usage of a king, and was contrary also to his contract with the gods. "Good, my hosts," he remonstrated, "it is Gesa, taboo, for me to eat alone." "But we never eat together," the queen replied. "I cannot violate my Gesa," said the High King. "I will eat with you," said Segda, sweet speech, "and thus, while you are our guest, you will not do violence to your vows." "Indeed," said Khan, "that will be a great satisfaction, for I have already all the trouble that I can cope with, and have no wish to add to it by offending the gods." "What is your trouble?" the gentle queen asked. "During a year," Khan replied, "there has been neither corn nor milk in Ireland. The land is parched, the trees are withered, the birds do not sing in Ireland, and the bees do not make honey." "You are certainly in trouble," the queen assented. "But," she continued, "for what purpose have you come to our island?" "I have come to ask for the loan of your son." "A loan of my son?" "I have been informed," Khan explained, "that if the son of a sinless couple is brought to Tara and is bathed in the waters of Ireland, the land will be delivered from those ills." The king of this island, Dara, had not hitherto spoken, but he now did so with astonishment and emphasis. "We would not lend our son to anyone, not even to gain the kingship of the world," said he. But Segda, observing that the guest's countenance was discomposed, broke in. "It is not kind to refuse a thing that the Ardri of Ireland asks for, and I will go with him." "Do not go, my pulse," his father advised. "Do not go, my one treasure," his mother pleaded. "I must go indeed," the boy replied, "for it is to do good I am required, and no person may shirk such a requirement." "Go then," said his father, "but I will place you under the protection of the High King and of the 4 provincial kings of Ireland, and under the protection of Art, the son of Khan, and of Fionn, the son of Ual, and under the protection of the magicians and poets and the men of art in Ireland." And he thereupon bound these protections and safeguards on the Ardri with an oath. "I will answer for these protections," said Con. He departed then from the island with Segda, and in 3 days they reached Ireland, and in due time they arrived at Tara. End of Chapter 6. Section 67 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Bakuma of the White Skin, Chapter 7. On reaching the palace, Con called his magicians and poets to a council and informed them that he had found the boy they sought, the son of a virgin. These learned people consulted together, and they stated that the young man must be killed, and that his blood should be mixed with the earth of Tara and sprinkled under the withered trees. When Segda heard this, he was astonished and defiant. Then, seeing that he was alone and without prospect of succor, he grew downcast and was in great fear for his life. But remembering the safeguards under which he had been placed, he enumerated these to the assembly and called on the High King to grant him the protections that were his due. Con was greatly perturbed, but, as in duty bound, he placed the boy under the various protections that were in his oath, and with the courage of one who has no more to gain or lose, he placed Segda, furthermore, under the protection of all the men of Ireland. But the men of Ireland refused to accept that bond, saying that although the Ardri was acting justly towards the boy, he was not acting justly towards Ireland. "We do not wish to slay this prince for our pleasure," they argued, "but for the safety of Ireland he must be killed." Angry parties were formed. Art and Fionn, the son of Ual, and the princes of the land were outraged at the idea that one who had been placed under their protection should be hurt by any hand. But the men of Ireland and the magicians stated that the king had gone to Fairy for a special purpose, and that his acts outside or contrary to that purpose were illegal, and committed no person to obedience. There were debates in the council hall, in the marketplace, in the streets of Tara, some holding that national honor dissolved and absolved all personal honor, and others protesting that no man had aught but his personal honor, and that above it not the gods, not even Ireland, could be placed, for it is to be known that Ireland is a god. Such a debate was in course, and Segda, to whom both sides addressed gentle and courteous arguments, grew more and more disconsolate. "You shall die for Ireland, dear heart," said one of them, and he gave Segda 3 kisses on each cheek. "Indeed," said Segda, returning those kisses, "indeed I had not bargained to die for Ireland, but only to bathe in her waters and to remove her pestilence." "But dear child and prince," said another, kissing him likewise, "if any one of us could save Ireland by dying for her, how cheerfully we would die." And Segda, returning his 3 kisses, agreed that the death was noble, but that it was not in his undertaking. Then, observing the stricken countenances about him, and the faces of men and women hewn thin by hunger, his resolution melted away, and he said, "I think I must die for you." And then he said, "I will die for you." And when he had said that, all the people present touched his cheek with their lips, and the love and peace of Ireland entered into his soul, so that he was tranquil and proud and happy. The executioner drew his wide, thin blade, and all those present covered their eyes with their cloaks, when a wailing voice called on the executioner to delay yet a moment. The High King uncovered his eyes and saw that a woman had approached, driving a cow before her. "Why are you killing the boy?" she demanded. The reason for this slaying was explained to her. "Are you sure," she asked, "that the poets and magicians really know everything?" "Do they not?" the king inquired. "Do they?" she insisted. And then, turning to the magicians, "Let one magician of the magicians tell me what is hidden in the bags that are lying across the back of my cow." But no magician could tell it, nor did they try to. "Questions are not answered thus," they said. "There is formulae, and the calling up of spirits, and lengthy, complicated preparations in our art." "I am not badly learned in these arts," said the woman, "and I say that if you slay this cow, the effect will be the same as if you had killed the boy." "We would prefer to kill a cow or 1,000 cows rather than harm this young prince," said Khan. "But if we spare the boy, will these evils return?" "They will not be banished until you have banished their cause." "And what is their cause?" "Bakuma is the cause, and she must be banished." "If you must tell me what to do," said Khan, "tell me at least to do something that I can do." "I will tell you certainly. You can keep Bakuma and your ills as long as you want to. It does not matter to me. Come, my son," she said to Segda, for it was Segda's mother who had come to save him. And then that sinless queen and her son went back to their home of enchantment, leaving the king and Fionn and the magicians and nobles of Ireland astonished and ashamed. End of Chapter 7. Section 68 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Bakuma of the White Skin, Chapter 8. There are good and evil people in this and in every other world, and the person who goes hence will go to the good or the evil that is native to him, while those who return come as surely to their due. The trouble which had fallen on Bakuma did not leave her repentant, and the sweet lady began to do wrong as instantly and innocently as a flower begins to grow. It was she who was responsible for the ills which had come on Ireland, and we may wonder why she brought these plagues and droughts to what was now her own country. Under all wrongdoing lies personal vanity, or the feeling that we are endowed and privileged beyond our fellows. It is probable that, however courageously she had accepted fate, Bakuma had been sharply stricken in her pride, in the sense of personal strength, aloofness, and identity, in which the mind likens itself to God and will resist every domination but its own. She had been punished, that is, she had submitted to control, and her sense of freedom, of privilege, of very being was outraged. The mind flinches even from the control of natural law, and how much more from the despotism of its own separated likenesses. For if another can control me, that other has usurped me, has become me, and how terribly I seem diminished by the seeming addition. This sense of separateness is vanity, and is the bed of all wrongdoing. For we are not freedom, we are control, and we must submit to our own function ere we can exercise it. Even unconsciously, we accept the rights of others to all that we have, and if we will not share our good with them, it is because we cannot, having none. But we will yet give what we have, although that be evil. To insist on other people sharing in our personal torment is the first step towards insisting that they shall share in our joy, as we shall insist when we get it. Bakuma considered that if she must suffer, all else she met should suffer also. She raged, therefore, against Ireland, and in particular she raged against young Art, her husband's son, and she left undone nothing that could afflict Ireland or the prince. She may have felt that she could not make them suffer, and that is a maddening thought to any woman. Or perhaps she had really desired the son instead of the father, and her thwarted desire had perpetuated itself as hate. But it is true that Art regarded his mother's successor with intense dislike, and it is true that she actively returned it. One day, Bakuma came on the lawn before the palace, and seeing that Art was at chess with Cramdis, she walked to the table on which the match was being played, and for some time regarded the game. But the young prince did not take any notice of her while she stood by the board, for he knew that this girl was the enemy of Ireland, and he could not bring himself even to look at her. Bakuma, looking down on his beautiful head, smiled as much in rage as in disdain. "O son of a king," said she, "I demand a game with you for stakes." Art then raised his head and stood up courteously, but he did not look at her. "Whatever the queen demands, I will do," said he. "Am I not your mother also?" she replied mockingly, as she took the seat which the chief magician leaped from. The game was set then, and her play was so skillful that Art was hard put to counter her moves. But at a point of the game, Bakuma grew thoughtful, and, as by a lapse of memory, she made a move which gave the victory to her opponent. But she had intended that. She sat then, biting on her lip with her white small teeth, and staring angrily at Art. "What do you demand from me?" she asked. "I bind you to eat no food in Ireland until you find the wand of Curoi, son of Dara." Bakuma then put a cloak about her, and she went from Tara northward and eastward until she came to the dewy, sparkling brew of Angus Mackinaog in Ulster, but she was not admitted there. She went thence to the Sidhe, ruled over by Ogabal, and although this lord would not admit her, his daughter Anna, who was her foster sister, let her into Fairy. She made inquiries, and was informed where the dun of Curoi Macdara was, and when she had received this intelligence, she set out for Slieve Mish. By what arts she coaxed Curoi to give up his wand, it matters not. Enough that she was able to return in triumph to Tara. When she handed the wand to Art, she said, "I claim my game of revenge." "It is due to you," said Art, and they sat on the lawn before the palace and played. A hard game that was, and at times each of the combatants sat for an hour staring on the board before the next move was made. and at times they looked from the board and for hours stared on the sky, seeking as though in heaven for advice. But Bakuma's foster sister, Anna, came from the Shi, and unseen by any, she interfered with Art's play, so that suddenly, when he looked again on the board, his face went pale, for he saw that the game was lost. "I didn't move that piece," said he sternly. "Nor did I," Bakuma replied, and she called on the onlookers to confirm that statement. She was smiling to herself secretly, for she had seen what the mortal eyes around could not see. "I think the game is mine," she insisted softly. "I think that your friends in Fairy have cheated," he replied, "but the game is yours if you are content to win it that way." "I bind you," said Bakuma, "to eat no food in Ireland until you have found Delvecam, the daughter of Morgan." "Where do I look for her?" said Art in despair. "She is in one of the islands of the sea," Bakuma replied. "That is all I will tell you." And she looked at him maliciously, joyously, contentedly, for she thought he would never return from that journey, and that Morgan would see to it. End of Chapter 8. Section 69 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Bakuma of the White Skin, Chapter 9. Art, as his father had done before him, set out for the many-colored land, but it was from Inverculpa he embarked, and not from Ben Adair. At a certain time he passed from the rough green ridges of the sea to enchanted waters, and he roamed from island to island, asking all people how he might come to Delvecam, the daughter of Morgan. But he got no news from anyone until he reached an island that was fragrant with wild apples, gay with flowers, and joyous with the song of birds and the deep mellow drumming of the bees. In this island he was met by a lady, Creda, the truly beautiful, and when they had exchanged kisses, he told her who he was and on what errand he was bent. "We have been expecting you," said Creda, "but alas, poor soul, it is a hard and a long bad way that you must go, for there is sea and land, danger and difficulty between you and the daughter of Morgan." "Yet I must go there," he answered. "There is a wild, dark ocean to be crossed. There is a dense wood where every thorn on every tree is sharp as a spear point and is curved and clutching. There is a deep gulf to be gone through," she said, "a place of silence and terror, full of dumb, venomous monsters. There is an immense oak forest, dark, dense, thorny, a place to be strayed in, a place to be utterly bewildered and lost in. There is a vast, dark wilderness, and therein is a dark house, lonely and full of echoes, and in it there are 7 gloomy hags, who are warned already of your coming, and are waiting to plunge you in a bath of molten lead." "It is not a choice journey," said Art, "but I have no choice and must go." "Should you pass those hags," she continued, "and no one has yet passed them, you must meet Ailil of the Black Teeth, the son of Mongan Tenderblossom, and who could pass that gigantic and terrible fighter?" "It is not easy to find the daughter of Morgan," said Art in a melancholy voice. "It is not easy," Creda replied eagerly, "and if you will take my advice—" "Advise me," he broke in, "for in truth there is no man standing in such need of counsel as I do." "I would advise you," said Creta in a low voice, "to seek no more for the sweet daughter of Morgan, but to stay in this place where all that is lovely is at your service." But, cried Art in astonishment. "Am I not as sweet as the daughter of Morgan?" she demanded, and she stood before him queenly and pleadingly, and her eyes took his with imperious tenderness. "By my hand," he answered, "you are sweeter and lovelier than any being under the sun. But, and with me," she said, "you will forget Ireland." "I am under bonds," cried Art. "I have passed my word, and I would not forget Ireland or cut myself from it for all the kingdoms of the many-colored land." Creta urged no more at that time, but as they were parting, she whispered, "There are 2 girls, sisters of my own, in Morgan's palace. They will come to you with a cup in either hand. One cup will be filled with wine, and one with poison. Drink from the right-hand cup, O my dear." Art stepped into his coracle, and then, wringing her hands, she made yet an attempt to dissuade him from that drear journey. "Do not leave me," she urged. "Do not affront these dangers. Around the palace of Morgan there is a palisade of copper spikes, and on the top of each spike the head of a man grins and shrivels. There is one spike only which bears no head, and it is for your head that spike is waiting. Do not go there, my love." "I must go, indeed," said Art earnestly. "There is yet a danger," she called. "Beware of Delvecam's mother, Doghead, daughter of the king of the Dogheads. Beware of her." "Indeed," said Art to himself, "there is so much to beware of that I will beware of nothing. I will go about my business," he said to the waves, "and I will let those beings and monsters and the people of the Dogheads go about their business." End of Chapter 9. Section 70 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Bakuma of the White Skin, Chapter 10. He went forward in his light bark, and at some moment found that he had parted from those seas, and was adrift on vaster and more turbulent billows. From those dark green surges there gaped at him monstrous and cavernous jaws, and round, wicked, red-rimmed, bulging eyes stared fixedly at the boat. A ridge of inky water rushed foaming mountainously on his board, and behind that ridge came a vast, warty head that gurgled and groaned. But at these vile creatures he thrust with his lengthy spear, or stabbed at closer reach with a dagger. He was not spared one of the terrors which had been foretold. Thus, in the dark, thick oak forest, he slew the 7 hags, and buried them in the molten lead which they had heated for him. He climbed an icy mountain, the cold breath of which seemed to slip into his body and chip off inside of his bones, and there, until he mastered the sort of climbing on ice, for each step that he took upwards, he slipped back 10 steps. Almost his heart gave way before he learned to climb that venomous hill. In a forked glen into which he slipped at nightfall, he was surrounded by giant toads who spat poison and were icy as the land they lived in, and were cold and foul and savage. At Shli of Seiv, he encountered the long-maned lions who lie in wait for the beasts of the world, growling woefully as they squat above their prey and crunch those terrified bones. He came on Ailil of the Black Teeth, sitting on the bridge that spanned a torrent, and the grim giant was grinding his teeth on a pillar stone. Art drew nigh unobserved and brought him low. It was not for nothing that these difficulties and dangers were in his path. These things and creatures were the invention of Doghead, the wife of Morgan, for it had become known to her that she would die on the day her daughter was wooed. Therefore, none of the dangers encountered by Art were real, but were magical chimeras conjured against him by the great witch. Affronting all, conquering all, he came in time to Morgan's Dun, a place so lovely that after the miseries through which he had struggled, he almost wept to see beauty again. Delvecam knew that he was coming. She was waiting for him, yearning for him. To her mind, Art was not only love, he was freedom, for the poor girl was a captive in her father's home. A great pillar, 100 feet high, had been built on the roof of Morgan's palace, and on the top of this pillar a tiny room had been constructed, and in this room Delvecam was a prisoner. She was lovelier in shape than any other princess of the many-colored land. She was wiser than all the other women of that land, and she was skillful in music, embroidery, and chastity, and in all else that pertained to the knowledge of a queen. Although Delvecam's mother wished nothing but ill to Art, she yet treated him with the courtesy proper in a queen on the one hand, and fitting towards the son of the King of Ireland on the other. Therefore, when Art entered the palace, he was met and kissed, and he was bathed and clothed and fed. 2 young girls came to him then, having a cup in each of their hands, and presented him with the kingly drink. But remembering the warning which Cretel had given him, he drank only from the right-hand cup, and escaped the poison. Next, he was visited by Delvecam's mother, Doghead, daughter of the king of the Dogheads, and Morgan's queen. She was dressed in full armor, and she challenged Art to fight with her. It was a woeful combat, for there was no craft or sagacity unknown to her, and Art would infallibly have perished by her hand, but that her days were numbered, her star was out, and her time had come. It was her head that rolled on the ground when the combat was over, and it was her head that grinned and shriveled on the vacant spike which she had reserved for Art's. Then Art liberated Delvecam from her prison at the top of the pillar, and they were affianced together. But the ceremony had scarcely been completed when the tread of a single man caused the palace to quake and seemed to jar the world. It was Morgan returning to the palace. The gloomy king challenged him to combat also, and in his honor Art put on the battle harness which he had brought from Ireland. He wore a breastplate and helmet of gold, a mantle of blue satin swung from his shoulders. His left hand was thrust into the grips of a purple shield, deeply bossed with silver, and in the other hand he held the wide-grooved, blue-hilted sword which had rung so often into fights and combats, and joyous feats and exercises. Up to this time, the trials through which he had passed had seemed so great that they could not easily be added to. But if all those trials had been gathered into one vast calamity, they would not equal 1/2 of the rage and catastrophe of his war with Morgan. For what he could not effect by arms, Morgan would endeavor by guile, so that while art drove at him, or parried a crafty blow, the shape of Morgan changed before his eyes, and the monstrous king was having at him in another form, and from a new direction. It was well for the son of the Ardri that he had been beloved by the poets and magicians of his land, and that they had taught him all that was known of shape-changing and words of power. He had need of all these. At times, for the weapon must change with the enemy, they fought with their foreheads as two giant stags, and the crash of their monstrous onslaught rolled and lingered on the air long after their skulls had parted. Then, as two lions, long-clawed, deep-mouthed, snarling, with rigid mane, with red-eyed glare, with flashing, sharp white fangs, they prowled lithely about each other, seeking for an opening. And then, as two green-ridged, white-topped, broad-swung, overwhelming, vehement billows of the deep, they met and crashed and sunk into and rolled away from each other, and the noise of these two waves was as the roar of all ocean when the howl of the tempest is drowned in the league-long fury of the surge. But when the wife's time has come, the husband is doomed. He is required elsewhere by his beloved, and Morgan went to rejoin his queen in the world that comes after the many-colored land. And his victor shore that knowledgeable head away from its giant shoulders. He did not tarry in the many-colored land, for he had nothing further to seek there. He gathered the things which pleased him best from among the treasures of its grisly king, and with Delvecam by his side, they stepped into the coracle. Then, setting their minds on Ireland, they went there, as it were, in a flash. The waves of all the world seemed to whirl past them in one huge green cataract. The sound of all these oceans boomed in their ears for one eternal instant. Nothing was for that moment but a vast roar and pour of waters. Thence they swung into a silence equally vast, and so sudden that it was as thunderous in the comparison as was the elemental rage they quitted. For a time they sat panting, staring at each other, holding each other, lest not only their lives, but their very souls should be swirled away in the gusty passage of world within world. And then, looking abroad, they saw the small bright waves creaming by the rocks of Ben Adair, and they blessed the power that had guided and protected them, and they blessed the comely land of Ire. On reaching Tara, Delvecam, who was more powerful in art and magic than Bakuma, ordered the latter to go away, and she did so. She left the king's side. She came from the midst of the counselors and magicians. She did not bid farewell to anyone. She did not say goodbye to the king as she set out for Ben Adair. End of chapter 10. End of Bakuma of the White Skin.
Section 71 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Mongan's Frenzy. Chapter 1. The abbot of the monastery of Movio sent word to the storytellers of Ireland that when they were in his neighborhood they should call at the monastery, for he wished to collect and write down the stories which were in danger of being forgotten. "These things also must be told," said he. In particular, he wished to gather tales which told of the deeds that had been done before the gospel came to Ireland. "For," said he, "there are very good tales among those ones, and it would be a pity if the people who come after us should be ignorant of what happened long ago, of the deeds of their fathers." So, whenever a storyteller chanced in that neighborhood, he was directed to the monastery, and there he received a welcome and his fill of all that is good for a man. The abbot's manuscript boxes began to fill up, and he used to regard that growing store with pride and joy. In the evenings, when the days grew short and the light went early, he would call for some one of these manuscripts and have it read to him by candlelight, in order that he might satisfy himself that it was as good as he had judged it to be on the previous hearing. One day, a storyteller came to the monastery, and, like all the others, he was heartily welcomed and given a great deal more than his need. He said that his name was Caride, and that he had a story to tell which could not be bettered among the stories of Ireland. The abbot's eyes glistened when he heard that. He rubbed his hands together and smiled on his guest. "What is the name of your story?" he asked. "It is called Mongan's Frenzy." "I never heard of it before," cried the abbot joyfully. "I am the only man that knows it," Caride replied. "But how does that come about?" the abbot inquired. "Because it belongs to my family," the storyteller answered. "There was a Caride of my nation with Mongan when he went into fairy. This Caride listened to the story when it was first told. Then he told it to his son, and his son told it to his son, and that son's great-great-grandson's son told it to his son's son, and he told it to my father, and my father told it to me." "And you shall tell it to me!" cried the abbot triumphantly. "I will indeed," said Caride. Vellum was then brought, and quills. The copyists sat at their tables. Ale was placed beside the storyteller, and he told this tale to the abbot. End of Chapter 1.
Section 72 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 2. Said Carietta, Monaghan's wife at that time was Brotierna, the Flame Lady. She was passionate and fierce, and because the blood would flood suddenly to her cheek, so that she who had seemed a lily became, while you looked upon her, a rose, she was called Flame Lady. She loved Monaghan with ecstasy and abandon, and for that also he called her Flame Lady. But there may have been something of calculation even in her wildest moment, for if she was delighted in her affection, she was tormented in it also, as are all those who love the great ones of life and strive to equal themselves where equality is not possible. For her husband was at once more than himself and less than himself. He was less than himself because he was now Monaghan. He was more than himself because he was one who had long disappeared from the world of men. His lament had been sung, and his funeral games played many, many years before, and Brotierna sensed in him secrets, experiences, knowledges in which she could have no part, and for which she was greedily envious. So she was continually asking him little simple questions apropos of every kind of thing. She weighed all that he said on whatever subject, and when he talked in his sleep, she listened to his dream. The knowledge that she gleaned from those listenings tormented her far more than it satisfied her, for the names of other women were continually on his lips, sometimes in terms of a dear affection, sometimes in accents of anger or despair, and in his sleep he spoke familiarly of people whom the storytellers told of, but who had been dead for centuries. Therefore she was perplexed and became filled with a very rage of curiosity. Among the names which her husband mentioned, there was one which, because of the frequency with which it appeared, and because of the tone of anguish and love and longing in which it was uttered, she thought of oftener than the others. The name was Duflaca. Although she questioned and cross-questioned Carietta, her storyteller, she could discover nothing about a lady who had been known as the Black Duck. But one night when Monaghan seemed to speak with Duflaca, he mentioned her father as Fiachna Dufmach Daman, and the storyteller said that king had been dead for a vast number of years. She asked her husband then boldly to tell her the story of Duflaca, and under the influence of their mutual love, he promised to tell it to her sometime. But each time she reminded him of his promise, he became confused and said that he would tell it some other time. As time went on, the poor flame lady grew more and more jealous of Duvlaka, and more certain that if only she could know what had happened, she would get some ease to her tormented heart, and some assuagement of her perfectly natural curiosity. Therefore she lost no opportunity of reminding Monaghan of his promise, and on each occasion he renewed the promise and put it back to another time. End of Chapter 2. Section 73 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens, Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 3. In the year when Kieran, the son of the carpenter, died, the same year when Tuathail Malgariv was killed, and the year when Diarmait, the son of Kirabal, became king of all Ireland, the year 538 of our era, in short, it happened that there was a great gathering of the men of Ireland at the hill of Uisneach in royal Meath. In addition to the council which was being held, there were games and tournaments, and brilliant deployments of troops, and universal feastings and enjoyments. The gathering lasted for a week, and on the last day of the week, Monaghan was moving through the crowd with 7 guards, his storyteller Carriede, and his wife. It had been a beautiful day with brilliant sunshine and great sport, but suddenly clouds began to gather in the sky to the west, and others came rushing blackly from the east. When these clouds met, the world went dark for a space, and there fell from the sky a shower of hailstones so large that each man wondered at their size, and so swift and heavy that the women and young people of the host screamed from the pain of the blows they received. Monaghan's men made a roof of their shields, and the hailstones battered on the shields so terribly that even under them they were afraid. They began to move away from the host, looking for shelter, and when they had gone apart a little way, they turned the edge of a small hill and a knoll of trees, and in the twinkling of an eye they were in fair weather. One minute they heard the clashing and bashing of the hailstones, the howling of the venomous wind, the screams of the women and the uproar of the crowd on the hill of Uisneach, and the next minute they heard nothing more of those sounds and saw nothing more of these sights, for they had been permitted to go at one step out of the world of men and into the world of fairy. End of Chapter 3. Section 74 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens, Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 4. There is a difference between this world and the world of the fairy, but it is not immediately perceptible. Everything that is here is there, but the things that are there are better than those that are here. All things that are bright are there brighter. There is more gold in the sun and more silver in the moon of that land. There is more scent in the flowers, more savour in the fruit. There is more comeliness in the men and more tenderness in the women. Everything in fairy is better by this one wonderful degree, and it is by this betterness you will know that you are there if you should ever happen to get there. Monaghan and his companions stepped from the world of storm into sunshine and a scented world. The instant they stepped, they stood, bewildered, looking at each other silently, questioningly, and then with one accord they turned to look back whence they had come. There was no storm behind them. The sunlight drowsed there as it did in front, a peaceful flood of living gold. They saw the shapes of the country to which their eyes were accustomed, and recognized the well-known landmarks, but it seemed that the distant hills were a trifle higher, and the grass which clothed them and stretched between was greener, was more velvety, that the trees were better clothed and had more of peace as they hung over the quiet ground. But Monaghan knew what had happened, and he smiled with glee as he watched his astonished companions, and he sniffed that balmy air as one whose nostrils remembered it. "You had better come with me," he said. "Where are we?" his wife asked. "Why, we are here," cried Monaghan. "Where else should we be?" He set off then, and the others followed, staring about them cautiously, and each man keeping a hand on the hilt of his sword. "Are we in fairy?" the flame lady asked. "We are," said Monaghan. When they had gone a little distance, they came to a grove of ancient trees. Mightily tall and well-grown these trees were, and the trunk of each could not have been spanned by 10 broad men. As they went among these quiet giants into the dappled obscurity and silence, their thoughts became grave, and all the motions of their minds elevated as though they must equal in greatness and dignity these ancient and glorious trees. When they passed through the grove, they saw a lovely house before them, built of mellow wood and with a roof of bronze. It was like the dwelling of a king, and over the windows of the sunny room there was a balcony. There were ladies on this balcony, and when they saw the travelers approaching, they sent messengers to welcome them. Monaghan and his companions were then brought into the house, and all was done for them that could be done for honored guests. Everything within the house was as excellent as all without, and it was inhabited by 7 men and 7 women, and it was evident that Monaghan and these people were well acquainted. In the evening a feast was prepared, and when they had eaten well there was a banquet. There were 7 vats of wine, and as Monaghan loved wine he was very happy, and he drank more on that occasion than anyone had ever noticed him to drink before. It was while he was in this condition of glee and expansion that the flame lady put her arms about his neck and begged he would tell her the story of Duvlaka, and being boisterous then and full of good spirits, he agreed to her request, and he prepared to tell the tale. The 7 men and 7 women of the fairy palace then took their places about him in a half-circle. His own 7 guards sat behind them, his wife, the flame lady, sat by his side, and at the back of all, Caryetta, his storyteller, listening with all his ears and remembering every word that was uttered. End of Chapter 4. Section 75 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 5. Said Monaghan, in the days of long ago and the times that have disappeared forever, there was one Fiach na Fin, the son of Baltan, the son of Muircheartaigh, the son of Murdoch, the son of Yogan, the son of Neil. He went from his own country when he was young, for he wished to see the land of Lochlin, and he knew that he would be welcomed by the king of that country, for Fiachna's father and Yulgarg's father had done deeds in common and were obliged to each other. He was welcomed, and he stayed at the court of Lochlin in great ease and in the midst of pleasures. It then happened that Yulgarg Mór fell sick, and the doctors could not cure him. They sent for other doctors, but they could not cure him, nor could anyone say what he was suffering from, beyond that he was wasting visibly before their eyes, and would certainly become a shadow and disappear in air unless he was healed and fattened and made visible. They sent for more distant doctors, and then for others more distant still, and at last they found a man who claimed that he could make a cure if the king were supplied with the medicine which he would order. "What medicine is that?" said they all. "This is the medicine," said the doctor. "Find a perfectly white cow with red ears, and boil it down in the lump, and if the king drinks that rendering he will recover." Before he had well said it, messengers were going from the palace in all directions looking for such a cow. They found lots of cows which were nearly like what they wanted, but it was only by chance they came on the cow which would do the work, and that beast belonged to the most notorious and malicious and cantankerous female in Lochlin, the Black Hag. Now the Black Hag was not only those things that have been said, she was also whiskered and warty and one-eyed and obstreperous, and she was notorious and ill-favored in many other ways also. They offered her a cow in the place of her own cow, but she refused to give it. Then they offered a cow for each leg of her cow, but she would not accept that offer unless Fiachna went bail for the payment. He agreed to do so, and they drove the beast away. On the return journey he was met by messengers who brought news from Ireland. They said that the king of Ulster was dead, and that he, Fiach na Fin, had been elected king in the dead king's place. He at once took ship for Ireland, and found that all he had been told was true, and he took up the government of Ulster. End of Chapter 5. Section 76 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 6. A year passed, and one day as he was sitting at judgment, there came a great noise from without, and this noise was so persistent that the people and the suitors were scandalized, and Fiachna at last ordered that the noisy person be brought before him to be judged. It was done, and to his surprise the person turned out to be the Black Hag. She blamed him in the court before his people, and complained that he had taken away her cow, and that she had not been paid the 4 cows he had gone bail for, and she demanded judgment from him and justice. "If you will consider it to be justice, I will give you 20 cows myself," said Fiachna. "I would not take all the cows in Ulster," she screamed. "Pronounce judgment yourself," said the king, "and if I can do what you demand, I will do it." For he did not like to be in the wrong, and he did not wish that any person should have an unsatisfied claim upon him. The black hag then pronounced judgment, and the king had to fulfill it. "I have come," said she, "from the east to the west. You must come from the west to the east and make war for me and revenge me on the king of Lochlann." Fiachna had to do as she demanded, and although it was with a heavy heart, he set out in 3 days' time for Lochlann, and he brought with him 10 battalions. He sent messengers before him to big Yulgarg, warning him of his coming, of his intention, and of the number of troops he was bringing. And when he landed, Yulgarg met him with an equal force, and they fought together. In the first battle 300 of the men of Lochlann were killed. But in the next battle Yulgarg Mór did not fight fair, for he let some venomous sheep out of a tent, and these attacked the men of Ulster and killed 900 of them. So vast was the slaughter made by these sheep, and so great the terror they caused, that no one could stand before them. But by great good luck there was a wood at hand, and the men of Ulster, warriors and princes and charioteers, were forced to climb up the trees, and they roosted among the branches like great birds, while the venomous sheep ranged below, bleating terribly and tearing up the ground. Fiachna Finn was also sitting in a tree very high up, and he was disconsolate. "We are disgraced," said he. "It is very lucky," said the man in the branch below, "that a sheep cannot climb a tree." "We are disgraced forever," said the king of Ulster. "If those sheep learn how to climb, we are undone surely," said the man below. "I will go down and fight the sheep," said Fiachna. But the others would not let the king go. "It is not right," they said, "that you should fight sheep." "Someone must fight them," said Fiachna Finn. "But no more of my men shall die until I fight myself. For if I am fated to die, I will die, and I cannot escape it. And if it is the sheep's fate to die, then die they will. For there is no man can avoid destiny, and there is no sheep can dodge it either." "Praise be to God," said the warrior that was higher up. "Amen," said the man who was higher than he, and the rest of the warriors wished good luck to the king. He started then to climb down the tree with a heavy heart. But while he hung from the last branch and was about to let go, he noticed a tall warrior walking towards him. The king pulled himself up on the branch again and sat dangle-legged on it to see what the warrior would do. The stranger was a very tall man, dressed in a green cloak with a silver brooch at the shoulder. He had a golden band about his hair and golden sandals on his feet, and he was laughing heartily at the plight of the men of Ireland. End of chapter 6.
Section 77 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 7.
"It is not nice of you to laugh at us," said Fiachna Finn. "Who could help laughing at a king hunkering on a branch and his army roosting around him like hens?" said the stranger. "Nevertheless," the king replied, "it would be courteous of you not to laugh at misfortune." "We laugh when we can," commented the stranger, "and are thankful for the chance." "You may come up into the tree," said Fiachna, "for I perceive that you are a mannerly person, and I see that some of the venomous sheep are charging in this direction. I would rather protect you," he continued, "than see you killed. For," said he lamentably, "I am going down now to fight the sheep." "They will not hurt me," said the stranger. "Who are you?" the king asked. "I am Manannán, the son of Lir." Fiachna knew then that the stranger could not be hurt. "What will you give me if I deliver you from the sheep?" asked Manannán. "I will give you anything you ask, if I have that thing." "I ask the rights of your crown and of your household for 1 day." Fiachna's breath was taken away by that request, and he took a little time to compose himself. Then he said mildly, "I will not have one man of Ireland killed if I can save him. All that I have they give me, all that I have I give to them, and if I must give this also, then I will give this, although it would be easier for me to give my life."
"That is agreed," said Mananan. He had something wrapped in a fold of his cloak, and he unwrapped and produced this thing. It was a dog. Now if the sheep were venomous, this dog was more venomous still, for it was fearful to look at. In body it was not large, but its head was of a great size, and the mouth that was shaped in that head was able to open like the lid of a pot. It was not teeth which were in that head, but hooks and fangs and prongs. Dreadful was that mouth to look at, terrible to look into, woeful to think about, and from it, or from the broad, loose nose that waggled above it, there came a sound which no word of man could describe. For it was not a snarl, nor was it a howl, although it was both of these. It was neither a growl nor a grunt, although it was both of these. It was not a yowl nor a groan, although it was both of these. For it was one sound made up of these sounds, and there was in it too a whine and a yelp, and a long-drawn snoring noise, and a deep purring noise, and a noise that was like the squeal of a rusty hinge, and there were other noises in it also. "The gods be praised," said the man who was in the branch above the king. "What for this time?" said the king. "Because that dog cannot climb a tree," said the man. And the man on the branch yet above him groaned out, "Amen." "There is nothing to frighten sheep like a dog," said Mananan, "and there is nothing to frighten these sheep like this dog." He put the dog on the ground then. "Little doggie, little treasure," said he, "go and kill the sheep." And when he said that, the dog put an addition and an addendum on to the noise he had been making before, so that the men of Ireland stuck their fingers into their ears and turned the whites of their eyes upwards, and nearly fell off their branches with the fear and the fright which that sound put into them. It did not take the dog long to do what he had been ordered. He went forward at first with a slow waddle, and as the venomous sheep came to meet him in bounces, he then went to meet them in wriggles, so that in a while he went so fast that you could see nothing of him but a head and a wriggle. He dealt with the sheep in this way, a jump and a chop for each, and he never missed his jump and he never missed his chop. When he got his grip, he swung round on it as if it was a hinge. The swing began with the chop, and it ended with the bit loose and the sheep giving its last kick. At the end of 10 minutes all the sheep were lying on the ground, and the same bit was out of every sheep, and every sheep was dead. "You can come down now," said Mananan. "That dog can't climb a tree," said the man in the branch above the king warningly. "Praise be to the gods," said the man who was above him. "Amen," said the warrior who was higher up than that. And the man in the next tree said, "Don't move a hand or foot until that dog chokes himself to death on the dead meat." The dog, however, did not eat a bit of the meat. He trotted to his master, and Mananan took him up and wrapped him in his cloak. "Now you can come down," said he. "I wish that dog was dead," said the king. But he swung himself out of the tree all the same, for he did not wish to seem frightened before Mananan. "You can go now and beat the men of Lochlann," said Mananan. "You will be king of Lochlann before nightfall." "I wouldn't mind that," said the king. "It's no threat," said Mananan. The son of Lear turned then and went away in the direction of Ireland to take up his one-day rights, and Fiachna continued his battle with the Lochlannachs. He beat them before nightfall, and by that victory he became king of Lochlann and king of the Saxons and the Britons. He gave the Black Hag 7 castles with their territories, and he gave her 100 of every sort of cattle that he captured. She was satisfied. Then he went back to Ireland, and after he had been there for some time, his wife gave birth to a son. End of Chapter 7. Section 78 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 8. "You have not told me one word about Duvlaka," said the Flame Lady reproachfully. "I am coming to that," replied Monaghan. He motioned towards one of the great vats, and wine was brought to him, of which he drank so joyously and so deeply that all people wondered at his thirst, his capacity, and his jovial spirits. "Now I will begin," said Monaghan. There was an attendant in Fiachnafin's palace who was called Anduv, and the same night that Fiachna's wife bore a son, the wife of Anduv gave birth to a son also,
This latter child was called Mac and Duv, but the son of Fiachna's wife was named Monaghan. "Ah," murmured the Flame Lady. The queen was angry. She said it was unjust and presumptuous that the servant should get a child at the same time that she got one herself, but there was no help for it, because the child was there and could not be obliterated. Now this also must be told. There was a neighboring prince called Fiachna Duv, and he was the ruler of the Dal Fiatach. For a long time he had been at enmity and spiteful warfare with Fiachna Finn, and to this Fiachna Duv there was born in the same night a daughter, and this girl was named Duvlaca of the White Hand. "Ah!" cried the Flame Lady. "You see," said Monaghan, and he drank anew and joyously of the fairy wine. In order to end the trouble between Fiachna Finn and Fiachna Duv, the babies were affianced to each other in the cradle on the day after they were born, and the men of Ireland rejoiced at that deed and at that news. But soon there came dismay and sorrow in the land, for when the little Monaghan was 3 days old, his real father, Manannán, the son of Lear, appeared in the middle of the palace. He wrapped Monaghan in his green cloak and took him away to rear and train in the land of promise, which is beyond the sea that is at the other side of the grave. When Fiachna Duv heard that Monaghan, who was affianced to his daughter Duvlaca, had disappeared, he considered that his compact of peace was at an end, and one day he came by surprise and attacked the palace. He killed Fiachna Finn at that battle, and he crowned himself King of Ulster. The men of Ulster disliked him, and they petitioned Manannán to bring Monaghan back, but Manannán would not do this until the boy was 16 years of age and well reared in the wisdom of the land of promise. Then he did bring Monaghan back, and by his means peace was made between Monaghan and Fiachna Duv, and Monaghan was married to his cradle bride, the young Duvlaca. End of Chapter 8. Section 79 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 9. One day Monaghan and Duvlaca were playing chess in their palace. Monaghan had just made a move of skill, and he looked up from the board to see if Duvlaca seemed as discontented as she had a right to be. He saw then over Duvlaca's shoulder a little black-faced, tufty-headed cleric leaning against the doorpost inside the room. "What are you doing there?" said Monaghan. "What are you doing there yourself?" said the little black-faced cleric. "Indeed, I have a right to be in my own house," said Monaghan. "Indeed, I do not agree with you," said the cleric. "Where ought I be, then?" said Monaghan. "You ought to be at Dunfiathac, avenging the murder of your father," replied the cleric, "and you ought to be ashamed of yourself for not having done it long ago. You can play chess with your wife when you have won the right to leisure." "But how can I kill my wife's father?" Monaghan exclaimed. "By starting about it at once," said the cleric. "Here is a way of talking," said Monaghan. "I know," the cleric continued, "that Duvlaca will not agree with a word I say on this subject, and that she will try to prevent you from doing what you have a right to do, for that is a wife's business. But a man's business is to do what I have just told you. So come with me now, and do not wait to think about it, and do not wait to play any more chess. Fiachna Duv has only a small force with him at this moment, and we can burn his palace as he burned your father's palace, and kill himself as he killed your father, and crown you King of Ulster rightfully, the way he crowned himself wrongfully as a king." "I begin to think that you own a lucky tongue, my black-faced friend," said Monaghan, "and I will go with you." He collected his forces then, and he burned Fiachna Duv's fortress, and he killed Fiachna Duv, and he was crowned King of Ulster. Then for the first time he felt secure and at liberty to play chess, but he did not know until afterwards that the black-faced, tufty-headed person was his father Manannán, although that was the fact. There are some who say, however, that Fiachna the Black was killed in the year 624, by the Lord of the Scots Dalriada Condat Care at the Battle of Ard Curin, but the people who say this do not know what they are talking about, and they do not care greatly what it is they say. End of Chapter 9. Section 80 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 10. "There is nothing to marvel about in this Duvlaca," said the Flame Lady scornfully.
She has got married, and she has been beaten at chess. It has happened before. Let us keep to the story, said Monaghan, and having taken some few dozen deep draughts of wine, he became even more jovial than before. Then he recommenced his tale. It happened on a day that Monaghan had need of treasure. He had many presents to make, and he had not as much gold and silver and cattle as was proper for a king. He called his nobles together and discussed what was the best thing to be done, and it was arranged that he should visit the provincial kings and ask boons from them. He set out at once on his round of visits, and the first province he went to was Leinster. The king of Leinster at that time was Brandhuv, the son of Echach. He welcomed Monaghan and treated him well, and that night Monaghan slept in his palace. When he awoke in the morning, he looked out of a lofty window, and he saw on the sunny lawn before the palace a herd of cows. There were 50 cows in all, for he counted them, and each cow had a calf beside her, and each cow and calf was pure white in color, and each of them had red ears. When Monaghan saw these cows, he fell in love with them as he had never fallen in love with anything before. He came down from the window and walked on the sunny lawn among the cows, looking at each of them and speaking words of affection and endearment to them all. And while he was thus walking and talking and looking and loving, he noticed that someone was moving beside him. He looked from the cows then, and saw the king of Leinster was at his side. "Are you in love with the cows?" Brandhof asked him. "I am," said Monaghan. "Everyone is," said the king of Leinster. "I never saw anything like them," said Monaghan. "Nobody has," said the king of Leinster. "I never saw anything I would rather have than these cows," said Monaghan. "These," said the king of Leinster, "are the most beautiful cows in Ireland, and," he continued thoughtfully, "Duvlaca is the most beautiful woman in Ireland." "There is no lie to what you say," said Monaghan. "Is it not a queer thing," said the king of Leinster, "that I should have what you want with all your soul, and that you should have what I want with all my heart?" "Queer indeed," said Monaghan. "But what is it that you do want?" "Duvlaca, of course," said the king of Leinster. "Do you mean," said Monaghan, "that you would exchange this herd of 50 pure white cows having red ears, and their 50 calves," said the king of Leinster, "for Duvlaca, or for any woman in the world?" "I would," cried the king of Leinster, and he thumped his knee as he said it. "Done!" roared Monaghan, and the two kings shook hands on the bargain. Monaghan then called some of his own people, and before any more words could be said, and before any alteration could be made, he set his men behind the cows, and marched home with them to Ulster. End of Section 10. Section 81 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens, Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 11. Duvlaca wanted to know where the cows came from, and Monaghan told her that the king of Leinster had given them to him. She fell in love with them as Monaghan had done, but there was nobody in the world could have avoided loving those cows. Such cows they were, such wonders. Monaghan and Duvlaca used to play chess together, and then they would go out together and look at the cows, and then they would go in together and would talk to each other about the cows. Everything they did together, for they loved to be with each other. However, a change came. One morning a great noise of voices and trampling of horses and rattle of armor came about the palace. Monaghan looked from the window. "Who is coming?" asked Duvlaca, but he did not answer her. "The noise must announce the visit of a king," Duvlaca continued. But Monaghan did not say a word. Duvlaca then went to the window. "Who is that king?" she asked, and her husband replied to her then. "That is the king of Leinster," said he mournfully. "Well," said Duvlaca, surprised, "is he not welcome?" "He is welcome indeed," said Monaghan lamentably. "Let us go out and welcome him properly," Duvlaca suggested. "Let us not go near him at all," said Monaghan, "for he is coming to complete his bargain." "What bargain are you talking about?" Duvlaca asked, but Monaghan would not answer that. "Let us go out," said he, "for we must go out." Monaghan and Duvlaca went out then and welcomed the king of Leinster. They brought him and his chief men into the palace, and water was brought for their baths, and rooms were appointed for them, and everything was done that should be done for guests. That night there was a feast, and after the feast there was a banquet, and all through the feast and the banquet the King of Leinster stared at Dubhlachcha with joy, and sometimes his breast was delivered of great sighs, and at times he moved as though in perturbation of spirit and mental agony. "There is something wrong with the King of Leinster," Dubhlachcha whispered. "I don't care if there is," said Monaghan. "You must ask what he wants." "But I don't want to know it," said Monaghan. "Nevertheless, you must ask him," she insisted. So Monaghan did ask him, and it was in a melancholy voice that he asked it. "Do you want anything?" said he to the King of Leinster. "I do indeed," said Branduv. "If it is an Ulster, I will get it for you," said Monaghan mournfully. "It is in Ulster," said Branduv. Monaghan did not want to say anything more then, but the King of Leinster was so intent, and everybody else was listening, and Dubhlachcha was nudging his arm. So he said, "What is it that you do want?" "I want Dubhlachcha." "I want her too," said Monaghan. "You made your bargain," said the King of Leinster. "My cows and their calves for your Dubhlachcha, and the man that makes a bargain keeps a bargain." "I never before heard," said Monaghan, "of a man giving away his own wife." "Even if you never heard of it before, you must do it now," said Dubhlachcha. "For honor is longer than life." Monaghan became angry when Dubhlachcha said that. His face went red as a sunset, and the veins swelled in his neck and forehead. "Do you say that?" he cried to Dubhlachcha. "I do," said Dubhlachcha. "Let the King of Leinster take her," said Monaghan. End of chapter 11. Section 82 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 12. Dubhlachcha and the King of Leinster went apart then to speak together, and the eye of the king seemed to be as big as a plate, so fevered was it, and so enlarged and inflamed by the look of Dubhlachcha. He was so confounded with joy also that his words got mixed up with his teeth, and Dubhlachcha did not know exactly what it was he was trying to say, and he did not seem to know himself. But at last he did say something intelligible, and this is what he said. "I am a very happy man," said he. "And I," said Dubhlachcha, "am the happiest woman in the world." "Why should you be happy?" the astonished king demanded. "Listen to me," she said. "If you tried to take me away from this place against my own wish, 1/2 of the men of Ulster would be dead before you got me, and the other half would be badly wounded in my defence." "A bargain is a bargain," the King of Leinster began. "But," she continued, "they will not prevent my going away, for they all know that I have been in love with you for ages." "What have you been in with me for ages?" said the amazed king. "In love with you," replied Dubhlachcha. "This is news," said the king, "and it is good news." "But by my word," said Dubhlachcha, "I will not go with you unless you grant me a boon." "All that I have," cried Branduv, "and all that everybody has." "And you must pass your word and pledge your word that you will do what I ask." "I pass it and pledge it," cried the joyful king. "Then," said Dubhlachcha, "this is what I bind on you." "Light the yoke," he cried. "Until 1 year is up and out, you are not to pass the night in any house that I am in." "By my head and my hand," Branduv stammered. "And if you come into a house where I am during the time and term of that year, you are not to sit down in the chair that I am sitting in." "Heavy is my doom," he groaned. "But," said Dubhlachcha, "if I am sitting in a chair or a seat, you are to sit in a chair that is over against me and opposite to me and at a distance from me." "Alas!" said the king, and he smote his hands together, and then he beat them on his head, and then he looked at them and at everything about, and he could not tell what anything was or where anything was, for his mind was clouded and his wits had gone astray. "Why do you bind these woes on me?" he pleaded. "I wish to find out if you truly love me." "But I do," said the king. "I love you madly and dearly and with all my faculties and members." "That is the way, love you," said Duvlaka. "We shall have a notable year of courtship and joy. And let us go now," she continued, "for I am impatient to be with you." "Alas!" said Branduv as he followed her. "Alas, alas!" said the King of Leinster. End of chapter 12. Section 83 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 13. "I think," said the Flame Lady, "that whoever lost that woman had no reason to be sad." Monaghan took her chin in his hand and kissed her lips. "All that you say is lovely, for you are lovely," said he, "and you are my delight and the joy of the world." Then the attendants brought him wine, and he drank so joyously of that and so deeply, that those who observed him thought he would surely burst and drown them. But he laughed loudly and with enormous delight, until the vessels of gold and silver and bronze chimed mellowly to his peal, and the rafters of the house went creaking. Said he, "Monaghan loved Duvlaka of the White Hand better than he loved his life, better than he loved his honor. The kingdoms of the world did not weigh with him besides the string of her shoe. He would not look at a sunset if he could see her. He would not listen to a harp if he could hear her speak, for she was the delight of ages, the gem of time, and the wonder of the world till doom. She went to Leinster with the king of that country, and when she had gone, Monaghan fell grievously sick, so that it did not seem he could ever recover again, and he began to waste and wither, and he began to look like a skeleton and a bony structure and a misery. Now this also must be known. Duvlaka had a young attendant who was her foster sister as well as her servant, and on the day that she got married to Monaghan, her attendant was married to Macanduv, who was the servant and foster brother to Monaghan. When Duvlaka went away with the king of Leinster, her servant, Macanduv's wife, went with her. So there were two wifeless men in Ulster at that time, namely Monaghan the king and Macanduv his servant. One day as Monaghan sat in the sun, brooding lamentably on his fate, Macanduv came to him. "How are things with you, master?" asked Macanduv. "Bad," said Monaghan. "It was a poor day brought you off with Manannán to the land of promise," said his servant. "Why should you think that?" inquired Monaghan. "Because," said Macanduv, "you learned nothing in the land of promise except how to eat a lot of food and how to do nothing in a deal of time." "What business is it of yours?" said Monaghan angrily. "It is my business, surely," said Macanduv, "for my wife has gone off to Leinster with your wife, and she wouldn't have gone if you hadn't made a bet and a bargain with that accursed king." Macanduv began to weep then. "I didn't make a bargain with any king," said he, "and yet my wife has gone away with one, and it's all because of you." "There is no one sorrier for you than I am," said Monaghan. "There is indeed," said Macanduv, "for I am sorrier myself." Monaghan roused himself then. "You have a claim on me truly," said he, "and I will not have any one with a claim on me that is not satisfied. Go," he said to Macanduv, "to that very place we both know of. You remember the baskets I left there with the sod from Ireland in one, and the sod from Scotland in the other. Bring me the baskets and sods." "Tell me the why of this," said his servant. "The king of Leinster will ask his wizards what I am doing, and this is what I will be doing. I will get on your back with a foot in each of the baskets, and when Branduv asks the wizard where I am, they will tell him that I have one leg in Ireland and one leg in Scotland, and as long as they tell him that, he will think he need not bother himself about me, and we will go into Leinster that way." "Not a bad way either," said Macanduv. They set out then. End of chapter 13.
Section 84 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens, Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 14. It was a long, uneasy journey, for although Mac Anduve was of stout heart and good will, yet no man can carry another on his back from Ulster to Leinster and go quick. Still, if you keep on driving a pig or a story, they will get at last to where you wish them to go, and the man who continues putting one foot in front of the other will leave his home behind, and will come at last to the edge of the sea and the end of the world. When they reached Leinster, the feast of my life was being held, and they pushed on by forced marches and long stages so as to be in time, and thus they came to the Moy of Kelcamain, and they mixed with the crowd that were going to the feast. A great and joyous concourse of people streamed about them. There were young men and young girls, and when these were not holding each other's hands, it was because their arms were round each other's necks. There were old lusty women going by, and when these were not talking, it was because their mouths were mutually filled with apples and meat pies. There were young warriors with mantles of green and purple and red flying behind them on the breeze. And when these were not looking disdainfully on older soldiers, it was because the older soldiers happened at that moment to be looking at them. There were old warriors with yard-long beards flying behind their shoulders like wisps of hay, and when these were not nursing a broken arm or a cracked skull, it was because they were nursing wounds in their stomachs or their legs. There were troops of young women who giggled as long as their breaths lasted and beamed when it gave out. Bands of boys who whispered mysteriously together and pointed with their fingers in every direction at once and would suddenly begin to run like a herd of stampeded horses. There were men with carts full of roasted meats, women with little vats full of mead, and others carrying milk and beer, folk of both sorts with towers swaying on their heads and they dripping with honey, children having baskets piled with red apples, and old women who peddled shellfish and boiled lobsters. There were people who sold 20 kinds of bread, with butter thrown in, sellers of onions and cheese, and others who supplied spare bits of armor, odd scabbards, spear handles, breastplate laces. People who cut your hair or told your fortune, or gave you a hot bath in a pot. Others who put a shoe on your horse or a piece of embroidery on your mantle, and others again who took stains off your sword, or dyed your fingernails, or sold you a hound. It was a great and joyous gathering that was going to the feast. Monaghan and his servants sat against a grassy hedge by the roadside and watched the multitude streaming past. Just then Monaghan glanced to the right whence the people were coming. Then he pulled the hood of his cloak over his ears and over his brow. "Alas," said he in a deep and anguished voice. Mac Anduve turned to him. "Is it a pain in your stomach, master?" "It is not," said Monaghan. "Well, what made you make that brutal and belching noise?" "It was a sigh I gave," said Monaghan. "Whatever it was," said Mac Anduve, "what was it?" "Look down the road on this side and tell me who is coming," said his master. "It is a lord with his troop." "It is the King of Leinster," said Monaghan. "The man," said Mac Anduve in a tone of great pity, "the man that took away your wife. And," he roared in a voice of extraordinary savagery, "the man that took away my wife into the bargain, and she not in the bargain." "Hush," said Monaghan, for a man who heard his shout stopped to tie a sandal, or to listen. "Master," said Mac Anduve, as the troop drew abreast and moved past. "What is it, my good friend?" "Let me throw a little small piece of a rock at the King of Leinster." "I will not." "A little bit only, a small bit, about twice the size of my head." "I will not let you," said Monaghan. When the king had gone by, Mac Anduve groaned a deep and dejected groan. "Ochon," said he. "Ochon, io goggio," said he. The man who had tied his sandal said then, "Are you in pain, honest man?" "I am not in pain," said Mac Anduve. "Well, what was it that knocked a howl out of you like the whelp of a sick dog, honest man?" "Go away," said Mac Anduve. "Go away, you flat-faced, nosy person." "There is no politeness left in this country," said the stranger, and he went away to a certain distance, and from thence he threw a stone at MacAndú's nose, and hit it. End of chapter 14. Section 85 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, chapter 15. The road was now not so crowded as it had been. Minutes would pass and only a few travelers would come, and minutes more would go when nobody was in sight at all. Then 2 men came down the road. They were clerics. "I never saw that kind of uniform before," said MacAndú. "Even if you didn't," said Monaghan, "there are plenty of them about. They are men that don't believe in our gods," said he. "Do they not indeed?" said MacAndú. "The rascals!" said he. What would Manannán say to that?" "The one in front carrying the big book is Tabraid. He is the priest of Kelkamain, and he is the chief of the 2. "Indeed and indeed," said MacAndú. "The one behind must be his servant, for he has a load on his back." The priests were reading their offices, and MacAndú marveled at that. "What is it they are doing?" said he. "They are reading." "Indeed and indeed they are," said MacAndú. "I can't make out a word of the language except that man behind says Amen, Amen every time the man in front puts a grunt out of him." "And they don't like our gods at all," said MacAndú. "They do not." "Play a trick on them, master," said MacAndú. Monaghan agreed to play a trick on the priests. He looked about them hard for a minute, and then he waved his hand at them. The 2 priests stopped, and they stared straight in front of them. Then they looked at each other, and then they looked at the sky. The clerk began to bless himself, and then Tabraid began to bless himself, and after that they didn't know what to do. For where there had been a road with a hedge on each side and fields stretching beyond them, there was now no road, no hedge, no field, but there was a great broad river sweeping across their path, a mighty tumble of yellow-brown waters, very swift, very savage, churning and billowing and jockeying among rough boulders and islands of stone. It was a water of villainous depth and of detestable wetness, of ugly hurrying and of desolate cavernous sound, and at a little to their right there was a thin, uncomely bridge that waggled across the torrent. Tabraid rubbed his eyes, and then he looked again. "Do you see what I see?" said he to the clerk. "I don't know what you see," said the clerk, "but what I see I never did see before, and I wish I did not see it now." "I was born in this place," said Tabraid. "My father was born here before me, and my grandfather was born here before him, but until this day and this minute I never saw a river here before, and I never heard of one." "What will we do at all?" said the clerk. "What will we do at all?" "We will be sensible," said Tabraid sternly, "and we will go about our business," said he. "If rivers fall out of the sky, what has that to do with you? And if there is a river here, which there is, why, thank God there is a bridge over it too." "Would you put a toe on that bridge?" said the clerk. "What is the bridge for?" said Tabraid. Monaghan and MacAndú followed them. When they got to the middle of the bridge, it broke under them, and they were precipitated into that boiling yellow flood. Monaghan snatched at the book as it fell from Tabraid's hand. "Won't you let them drown, master?" asked MacAndú. "No," said Monaghan. "I'll send them a mile down the stream, and then they can come to land." Monaghan then took on himself the form of Tabraid, and he turned MacAndú into the shape of the clerk. "My head has gone bald," said the servant in a whisper. "That is part of it," replied Monaghan. "So long as we know," said MacAndú. They went on then to meet the King of Leinster. End of chapter 15. Section 86 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, chapter 16. They met him near the place where the games were played. "Good my soul, Tabraid!" cried the King of Leinster, and he gave Monaghan a kiss. Monaghan kissed him back again. "Amen, amen," said MacAndú. "What for?" said the King of Leinster, and then MacAndú began to sneeze, for he didn't know what for. "It is a long time since I saw you, Tabraid," said the king, "but at this minute I am in great haste and hurry. Go you on before me to the fortress, and you can talk to the queen that you'll find there, she that used to be the King of Ulster's wife. Kevin Cochlach, my charioteer, will go with you, and I will follow you myself in a while. The King of Leinster went off then, and Monaghan and his servant went with the charioteer and the people. Monaghan read away out of the book, for he found it interesting, and he did not want to talk to the charioteer. And Mac Andúv cried, "Amen, Amen," every time that Monaghan took his breath. The people who were going with them said to one another that Mac Andúv was a queer kind of clerk, and that they had never seen anyone who had such a mouthful of amens. But in a while they came to the fortress, and they got into it without any trouble, for Kevin Cochlach, the king's charioteer, brought them in. Then they were led to the room where Dubhlaca was, and as he went into that room Monaghan shut his eyes, for he did not want to look at Dubhlaca while other people might be looking at him. "Let everybody leave this room while I am talking to the queen," said he, and all the attendants left the room, except one, and she wouldn't go, for she wouldn't leave her mistress. Then Monaghan opened his eyes, and he saw Dubhlaca, and he made a great bound to her and took her in his arms, and Mac Andúv made a savage and vicious and terrible jump at the attendant, and took her in his arms and bit her ear, and kissed her neck and whipped down into her back. "Go away," said the girl. "Unhand me, villain," said she. "I will not," said Mac Andúv, "for I'm your own husband. I'm your own Mac, your little Mac, your Macky Whack Whack." Then the attendant gave a little squeal, and she bit him on each ear and kissed his neck and wept down into his back, and said that it wasn't true and that it was. End of chapter 16. Section 87 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens, Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 17. But they were not alone, although they thought they were. The hag that guarded the jewels was in the room. She sat hunched up against the wall, and as she looked like a bundle of rags, they did not notice her. She began to speak then. "Terrible are the things I see," said she. "Terrible are the things I see." Monaghan and his servant gave a jump of surprise, and their two wives jumped and squealed. Then Monaghan puffed out his cheeks till his face looked like a bladder, and he blew a magic breath at the hag so that she seemed to be surrounded by a fog, and when she looked through that breath, everything seemed to be different to what she had thought. Then she began to beg everyone's pardon. "I had an evil vision," said she. "I saw crossways. How sad it is that I should begin to see the sort of things that I thought I saw." "Sit in the chair, mother," said Monaghan, "and tell me what you thought you saw." And he slipped a spike under her, and Mac Andúv pushed her into the seat, and she died on the spike. Just then there came a knocking at the door. Mac Andúv opened it, and there was Braid standing outside, and 29 of his men were with him, and they were all laughing. "A mile was not half enough," said Mac Andúv reproachfully. The chamberlain of the fortress pushed into the room, and he stared from one Braid to the other. "This is a fine growing year," said he. "There never was a year when Braids were as plentiful as they are this year. There is a Braid outside, and there is a Braid inside. And who knows but there are some more of them under the bed. The place is crawling with them," said he. Monaghan pointed at Braid. "Don't you know who that is?" he cried. "I know who he says he is," said the chamberlain. "Well, he is Monaghan," said Monaghan. "And these 29 men are 29 of his nobles from Ulster." At that news the men of the household picked up clubs and cudgels and every kind of thing that was near, and made a violent and woeful attack on Braid's men. The King of Leinster came in then, and when he was told Braid was Monaghan, he attacked them as well. And it was with difficulty that Braid got away to Kilcamaine with 9 of his men, and they all wounded. The King of Leinster came back then. He went to Dubhlaca's room. "Where is Braid?" said he. "It wasn't Braid was here," said the hag, who was still sitting on the spike and was not half dead. "It was Monaghan. Why did you let him near you?" said the king to Dubhlaca. "There is no one who has a better right to be near me than Monaghan has," said Dubhlaca. "He is my own husband," said she. And then the king cried out in dismay, "I have beaten Braid's people.
He rushed from the room. "Send for to Braid till I apologize," he cried. "Tell him it was all a mistake. Tell him it was Monaghan." End of chapter 17. Section 88 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 18. Monaghan and his servant went home, and, for what pleasure is greater than that of memory exercised in conversation, for a time the feeling of an adventure well accomplished kept him in some contentment. But at the end of a time that pleasure was worn out, and Monaghan grew at first dispirited, and then sullen, and after that as ill as he had been on the previous occasion. For he could not forget Duvlaka of the White Hand, and he could not remember her without longing and despair. It was in the illness which comes from longing and despair that he sat one day looking on the world that was black although the sun shone, and that was lean and unwholesome although autumn fruits were heavy on the earth and the joys of harvest were about him. "Winter is in my heart," quoth he, "and I am cold already." He thought too that some day he would die, and the thought was not unpleasant, for one half of his life was away in the territories of the King of Leinster, and the half that he kept in himself had no spice in it. He was thinking in this way when Mac Anduv came toward him over the lawn, and he noticed that Mac Anduv was walking like an old man. He took little slow steps, and he did not loosen his knees when he walked, so he went stiffly. One of his feet turned pitifully outwards, and the other turned lamentably in. His chest was pulled inwards, and his head was stuck outwards and hung down in the place where his chest should have been, and his arms were crooked in front of him with the hands turned wrongly, so that one palm was shown to the east of the world, and the other one was turned to the west. "How goes it, Mac Anduv?" said the king. "Bad," said Mac Anduv. "Is that the sun I see shining, my friend?" the king asked. "It may be the sun," replied Mac Anduv, peering curiously at the golden radiance that dozed about them. "But maybe it's a yellow fog." "What is life at all?" said the king. "It is a weariness and a tiredness," said Mac Anduv. "It is a long yawn without sleepiness. It is a bee lost at midnight and buzzing on a pane. It is the noise made by a tied-up dog. It is nothing worth dreaming about. It is nothing at all." "How well you explain my feelings about Duvlaka," said the king. "I was thinking about my own lamb," said Mac Anduv. "I was thinking about my own treasure, my cup of cheeriness and the pulse of my heart." And with that he burst into tears. "Alas," said the king. "But," sobbed Mac Anduv, "what right have I to complain? I am only the servant, and although I didn't make any bargain with the King of Leinster or with any king of them all, yet my wife is gone away as if she was the consort of a potentate, the same as Duvlaka is." Monaghan was sorry then for his servant, and he roused himself. "I am going to send you to Duvlaka." "Where the one is, the other will be," cried Mac Anduv joyously. "Go," said Monaghan, "to Rathskirt of Bregia. You know the place? As well as my tongue knows my teeth? Duvlaka is there. See her and ask her what she wants me to do." Mac Anduv went there and returned. "Duvlaka says that you are to come at once, for the King of Leinster is journeying around his territory, and Kevin Cockloch, the charioteer, is making bitter love to her and wants her to run away with him." Monaghan set out, and in no great time, for they travelled night and day, they came to Bregla, and gained admittance to the fortress. But just as he got in he had to go out again, for the King of Leinster had been warned of Monaghan's journey, and came back to his fortress in the nick of time. When the men of Ulster saw the condition into which Monaghan fell, they were in great distress, and they all got sick through compassion for their king. The nobles suggested to him that they should march against Leinster and kill that king and bring back Duvlaka, but Monaghan would not consent to this plan. "For," said he, "the thing I lost through my own folly, I shall get back through my own craft." And when he said that, his spirits revived, and he called for Mac Anduv. "You know, my friend," said Monaghan, "that I can't get Duvlaka back unless the King of Leinster asks me to take her back, for a bargain is a bargain." "That will happen when pigs fly," said Mac Anduv, "and," said he, "I did not make any bargain with a king that is in the world."
I heard you say that before, said Monaghan. I will say it till doom, cried his servant. For my wife has gone away with that pestilent king, and he has got the double of your bad bargain. Monaghan and his servant then set out for Leinster. When they neared that country, they found a great crowd going on the road with them, and they learned that the king was giving a feast in honor of his marriage to Duvlaka, for the year of waiting was nearly out, and the king had sworn he would delay it no longer. They went on, therefore, but in low spirits, and at last they saw the walls of the king's castle towering before them, and a noble company going to and fro on the lawn. End of section 18. Section 89 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens, Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 19. They sat in a place where they could watch the castle and compose themselves after their journey. "How are we going to get into the castle?" asked Mac Anduv. For there were hatchet men on guard in the big gateway, and there were spearmen at short intervals around the walls, and men to throw hot porridge off the roof were standing in the right places. "If we cannot get in by hook, we will get in by crook," said Monaghan. "They are both good ways," said Mac Anduv, "and whichever of them you decide on, I'll stick by." Just then they saw the hag of the mill coming out of the mill, which was down the road a little. Now the hag of the mill was a bony, thin pull of a hag with odd feet. That is, she had one foot that was too big for her, so that when she lifted it up it pulled her over, and she had one foot that was too small for her, so that when she lifted it up she didn't know what to do with it. She was so long that you thought you would never see the end of her, and she was so thin that you thought you didn't see her at all. One of her eyes was set where her nose should have been, and there was an ear in its place, and her nose itself was hanging out of her chin, and she had whiskers round it. She was dressed in a red rag that was really a hole with a fringe on it, and she was singing, "Oh, hush thee, my one love," to a cat that was yelping on her shoulder. She had a tall, skinny dog behind her called Broter. It hadn't a tooth in his head except one, and it had the toothache in that tooth. Every few steps it used to sit down on its hunkers and point its nose straight upwards and make a long, sad complaint about its tooth. And after that it used to reach its hind leg round to try to scratch out its tooth. And then it used to be pulled on again by the straw rope that was around its neck, and which was tied at the other end to the hag's heaviest foot. There was an old knock-kneed, raw-boned, one-eyed, little-winded, heavy-headed mare with her also. Every time it put a front leg forward, it shivered all over the rest of its legs backwards. And when it put a hind leg forward, it shivered all over the rest of its legs frontwards, and it used to give a great whistle through its nose when it was out of breath, and a big, thin hen was sitting on its croup. Monaghan looked on the hag of the mill with delight and affection. "This time," said he to Mac Anduv, "I'll get back my wife." "You will indeed," said Mac Anduv heartily, "and you'll get mine back too." "Go over yonder," said Monaghan, "and tell the hag of the mill that I want to talk to her." Mac Anduv brought her over to him. "Is it true what the servant man said?" she asked. "What did he say?" said Monaghan. "He said you wanted to talk to me." "It is true," said Monaghan. "This is a wonderful hour and a glorious minute," said the hag, "for this is the first time in 60 years that anyone wanted to talk to me. Talk on now," said she, "and I'll listen to you if I can remember how to do it. Talk gently," said she, "the way you won't disturb the animals, for they are all sick." "They are sick indeed," said Mac Anduv pityingly. "The cat has a sore tail," said she, "by reason of sitting too close to a part of the hob that was hot. The dog has a toothache, the horse has a pain in her stomach, and the hen has the pip." "Ah, it's a sad world," said Mac Anduv. "There you are," said the hag. "Tell me," Monaghan commenced, "if you got a wish, what is it you would wish for?" The hag took the cat off her shoulder and gave it to Mac Anduv. "Hold that for me while I think," said she. "Would you like to be a lovely young girl?" asked Monaghan. "I'd sooner be that than a skin deal," said she. "And would you like to marry me or the King of Leinster?" "I'd like to marry either of you, or both of you, or whichever you come first." "Very well," said Monaghan. "You shall have your wish." He touched her with his finger, and the instant he touched her, all dilapidation and wryness and age went from her, and she became so beautiful that one dared scarcely look at her, and so young that she seemed but 16 years of age. "You are not the hag of the mill any longer," said Monaghan. "You are Ivel of the shining cheeks, daughter of the King of Munster." He touched the dog too, and it became a little silky lapdog that could nestle in your palm. Then he changed the old mare into a brisk, piebald palfrey. Then he changed himself so that he became the living image of A, the son of the King of Connaught, who had just been married to Ivel of the Shining Cheeks. And then he changed Mac-Andouv into the likeness of A's attendant, and then they all set off towards the fortress, singing that song that begins, "My wife is nicer than anyone's wife, anyone's wife, anyone's wife. My wife is much nicer than anyone's wife, which nobody can deny." End of section 19. Section 90 of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens. Monaghan's Frenzy, Chapter 20. The doorkeeper brought word to the King of Leinster that the son of the King of Connaught, A the Beautiful, and his wife, Ivel of the Shining Cheeks, were at the door, that they had been banished from Connaught by A's father, and they were seeking the protection of the King of Leinster. Brandouv came to the door himself to welcome them, and the minute he looked on Ivel of the Shining Cheeks, it was plain that he liked looking at her. It was now drawing towards evening, and a feast was prepared for the guests with the banquet to follow it. At the feast, Duvlaka sat beside the King of Leinster, but Monaghan sat opposite him with Ivel. And Monaghan put more and more magic into the hag, so that her cheeks shone and her eyes gleamed, and she was utterly bewitching to the eye. And when Brandouv looked at her, she seemed to grow more and more lovely, and more desirable, and at last there was not a bone in his body as big as an inch that was not filled with love and longing for the girl. Every few minutes he gave a great sigh as if he had eaten too much, and when Duvlaka asked him if he had eaten too much, he said he had, but that he had not drunk enough, and by that he meant he had not drunk enough from the eyes of the girl before him. At the banquet which was then held, he looked at her again, and every time he took a drink he toasted Ivel across the brim of his goblet, and in a little while she began to toast him back across the rim of her cup, for he was drinking ale, but she was drinking mead. Then he sent a messenger to her to say that it was a far better thing to be the wife of the King of Leinster than to be the wife of the son of the King of Connaught, for a king is better than a prince, and Ivel thought that this was as wise a thing as anybody had ever said. And then he sent a message to say that he loved her so much that he would certainly burst of love if it did not stop. Monaghan heard the whispering, and he told the hag that if she did what he advised, she would certainly get either himself or the King of Leinster for a husband. "Either of you will be welcome," said the hag. "When the king says he loves you, ask him to prove it by gifts. Ask him for his drinking horn first." She asked for that, and he sent it to her filled with good liquor. Then she asked for his girdle, and he sent her that. His people argued with him and said it was not right that he should give away the treasures of Leinster to the wife of the King of Connaught's son. But he said that it did not matter, for when he got the girl he would get his treasures with her. But every time he sent anything to the hag, Mac-Andouv snatched it out of her lap and put it in his pocket. "Now," said Monaghan to the hag, "tell the servant to say that you would not leave your own husband for all the wealth of the world." She told the servant that, and the servant told it to the king. When Brandouv heard it, he nearly went mad with love and longing and jealousy, and with rage also, because of the treasure he had given her and might not get back. He called Monaghan over to him, and spoke to him very threateningly and ragingly. "I am not one who takes a thing without giving a thing," said he. "Nobody could say you were," agreed Monaghan. "Do you see this woman sitting beside me?" he continued, pointing to Duvlaka. "I do indeed," said Monaghan. "Well," said Brandouv, "this woman is Duvlaka of the White Hand that I took away from Monaghan. She is just going to marry me, but if you will make an exchange, you can marry this Duvlaka here, and I will marry that Ivel of the Shining Cheeks yonder." Monaghan pretended to be very angry then. If I had come here with horses and treasures, you would be in your right to take these from me, but you have no right to ask for what you are now asking." "I do ask for it," said Branduv menacingly, "and you must not refuse a lord." "Very well," said Monaghan reluctantly, and as if in great fear. "If you will make the exchange, I will make it, although it breaks my heart." He brought Ivel over to the king then, and gave her 3 kisses. "The king would suspect something if I did not kiss you," said he, and then he gave the hag over to the king. After that they all got drunk and merry, and soon there was a great snoring and snorting, and very soon all the servants fell asleep also, so that Monaghan could not get anything to drink. Macan Duv said it was a great shame, and he kicked some of the servants, but they did not budge. And then he slipped out to the stables and saddled 2 mares. He got on one with his wife behind him, and Monaghan got on the other with Duvlaka behind him, and they rode away towards Ulster like the wind, singing this song: "The King of Leinster was married today, married today, married today. The King of Leinster was married today, and everyone wishes him joy." In the morning the servants came to waken the King of Leinster, and when they saw the face of the hag lying on the pillow beside the king, and her nose all covered with whiskers, and her big foot and little foot sticking away out at the end of the bed, they began to laugh and poke one another in the stomachs and thump one another on the shoulders, so that the noise awakened the king, and he asked what was the matter with them at all. It was then he saw the hag lying beside him, and he gave a great screech and jumped out of bed. "Aren't you the hag of the mill?" said he. "I am indeed," she replied, "and I love you dearly." "I wish I didn't see you," said Branduv. That was the end of the story, and when he had told it, Monaghan began to laugh uproariously and called for more wine. He drank this deeply, as though he was full of thirst and despair and wild jollity, but when the flame lady began to weep, he took her in his arms and caressed her, and said that she was the love of his heart and the one treasure of the world. After that they feasted in great contentment, and at the end of the feasting they went away from Fairy and returned to the world of men. They came to Monaghan's palace at Moylinny, and it was not until they reached the palace that they found they had been away 1 whole year, for they had thought they were only away 1 night. They lived then peacefully and lovingly together, and that ends the story. But Brotiarna did not know that Monaghan was Fionn. The abbot leaned forward. "Was Monaghan Fionn?" he asked in a whisper. "He was," replied Cariete. "Indeed, indeed," said the abbot. After a while he continued, "There is only one part of your story that I do not like." "What part is that?" asked Cariete. "It is the part where the holy man Tabraid is ill-treated by that rap, by Monaghan." Cariete agreed that it was ill done, but to himself he said gleefully that whenever he was asked to tell the story of how he told the story of Monaghan, he would remember what the abbot said. End of Monaghan's Frenzy. End of Irish Fairy Tales by James Stephens.